So, Congressman, a year ago, you and I were talking over the phone. You were basically hiding in the U.S. Capitol. What are your thoughts a year later on that?
Well, I still reflect back at him on that day in the sense of surrealism about what was happening around me and to my colleagues. And it really felt, on the one hand, like you were watching a movie where people were attacking the U.S. Capitol. You have to remind yourself what is going on around you is actually happening. Unthinkable things that, I took as an article of faith. I'm sure you did growing up, that whoever won the election fair and square would be named the president, or to all the other offices that we elect. And the notion that there was a group heavily armed, intent on hurting people, there to overturn an election was just unfathomable. Looking back over the last year, two things are clear to me. One, we need to continue to remember and learn from the lessons of January 6th. Secondly, to continue to remind ourselves that we are at a fragile point in American democracy, and that people are, as we speak today, trying to undermine the system which we have lived with for centuries and relied upon for centuries. And that is a chilling thought. And so January 6th should do, among other things, remind us that we have to be vigilant if we're going to care about and protect our democratic institutions and the Constitution.
In your view, what needs to happen to do that?
We need to go back to respecting election results. There was no fraud. There was no evidence of any fraud in the presidential election, and yet a substantial number of people continue to posit the argument that the election was stolen. No evidence of that whatsoever, and yet a significant number of Americans believe it, or at least say that they believe it. I don't know whether they really do. So we've got to, reestablish that we all, on all sides, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, shouldn't matter. Election results have to matter. If they don't, then we're no better than the dictatorships we see all around the world.
You speak with both Democrats and Republicans behind the scenes, those who are in leadership roles. What are they telling you when they talk about January 6th?
It's really interesting. There are a small number of Republicans in the House of Representatives who really believe the lies that President Trump and the people within his administration have continued to this day to sell to the American public. They believe it. And then there's the majority, I believe, of members of the House who are Republicans who don't believe it, who think it's beyond ridiculous, that it's potentially dangerous, but haven't had the courage to really speak up and are afraid of the backlash within their own party. And there are a couple who I think, and I have enormous respect for Liz Cheney. I think she's a patriot. There's a lot of things we don't agree on policy-wise, but I'll tell you, she has demonstrated enormous courage and is dedicated to the Constitution, dedicated to the Republic. But she's too few in number, and I'm really concerned about it. When people stand silently by and allow atrocities to happen, they are essentially abetting those things, which I think, if we're not careful, will really lead to the end of the American Republic.
There are those who argue it was bad, but it was also, in their eyes, spur of the moment. The folks who went in there did not have, for the most part, guns or anything like that, and were paying too much attention to this and overblowing it. What's your response to that?
Well, they attacked members of the United States Capitol Police. They did use weapons in many cases. This was, and we're seeing more and more details about this, this was a concerted effort, organized, we believe, potentially by people in the White House, maybe members of Congress. And the evidence of that, in my view, which will become clearer over the next several months, is the number of people fighting subpoenas by Congress to come and tell us what role they played. If honestly, people should be forthcoming. There's no executive privilege here. A former president can't argue that the potential covering up of a crime is protected by executive privilege. So when we see this, we will learn how much more this was really coordinated, and how there was a lot of forethought about what was happening on January 6th. Is it true some people came because they supported the president and didn't want Congress to certify the Electoral College, but they had no malintent? Perhaps, but there's no question that a lot of responsible people in positions of responsibility actively were trying to overturn the election results, and were really involved in treason and insurrection against the United States.
My last question for you, do you suspect that this will happen again?
Well, I hope not from a physical point of view, but I think the thing that we all have to be on guard against is the erosion of the values that we all have. That, that grand, in my view, one of the greatest miracles of American democracy, John Adams turned over the keys of the White House to Thomas Jefferson, the first peaceful transfer of power in American history. We have withstood for 2 centuries plus any challenges to that notion until 2020. So I hope there's no attacks, obviously, in a physical way on the Capitol, but more insidious, more, in my view, the darker alternative is that we change the rules so that the voice of voters and the American public is no longer the prevailing voice in American politics. Then I think we're in a place where the American democracy simply isn't functioning anymore, and I'm very fearful of that.
Congressman, anything else you'd like to add that I might have missed?
No, I just hope people take this very, very seriously. We are at an important and fragile point in American politics, and we need patriots on all sides to stand up and say, we're not going to allow the foundations of our democracy to be eroded any further.